They married in secret without me, then tried to take my house in court. When I called to ask about my only son's wedding date, my daughter-in-law Brooke looked me in the eye and said, "We got married last week. Only the important people were invited." I had paid their rent for 4 years straight. That day, something inside me broke and something new woke up. I stood frozen in my Atlanta living room, phone heavy in my hand. Evelyn Harper, that's me, a 70-year-old widow who'd scraped by on my late husband's pension to keep them afloat. For 4 years, I'd covered their $600 monthly rent, stocked their kitchen when Ryan's freelance IT gigs dried up, and even chipped in for Brooke's influencer wardrobe. I'd spent $300 on a soft blue dress for the ceremony, imagining family photos where I'd finally feel included. But no, they hadn't even bothered to tell me. Ryan avoided my eyes, mumbling about it being small and private. But I saw the truth later on social media. Brooke's parents beaming beside them, her brothers raising glasses, everyone in fancy outfits I'd indirectly funded with last month's $900 emergency transfer. The white gown Brooke wore, part of the $1,200 I'd given for her personal needs. It hit like a freight train. I'd canceled my own doctor's visits to save for their whims, eaten canned soup so they could dine out. And now, only important people. Me, the one who'd kept a roof over their heads, not important enough. That phrase echoed as I hung up the dress, untouched. I'd set aside $1,500 as a gift, cleaned my house top to bottom, thinking they'd stop by. All shattered in seconds. If this is the first time you've heard one of my stories, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happened next still shocks people when I tell them in full. Let's get into it. A week later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, my phone rang and Brooke's name lit up the screen. Her voice came through sweet as ever, the one she only used when the numbers in their checking account were running low. "Evelyn, honey, I hate to bother you, but the rent is due tomorrow, and the transfer you usually send hasn't come through yet. The landlord already left a notice on the door." I sat down at my kitchen table with the coffee going cold in front of me and said nothing for a long moment. I could hear her breathing, waiting. In the background, Ryan was saying something I couldn't make out. Finally, I spoke, calm and clear. "Brooke, didn't I teach you that I only help the people who really matter?" Dead silence. Then a nervous laugh. "Evelyn, what are you talking about? You've always been family to us." Family. The word tasted like rust in my mouth. I thought about the 4 years of automatic transfers, the birthdays, the emergencies, the honeymoon they took to Cancun that I paid for without ever seeing a single thank you note. $42,000 gone from the savings my husband left me so I could live my last years without worry. "I must have missed your wedding invitation," I said. "Guess I'm not family after all." She started stammering excuses, something about keeping it small, about COVID rules that never existed, about how they were planning a big reception later, and of course I would be the guest of honor. I let her talk until she ran out of air. Then I told her the transfers were canceled, the joint credit card I had co-signed, and the insurance on Ryan's truck would lapse at the end of the month. She called me selfish. She told me blood is thicker than water. She even cried a little. Real tears or fake, I no longer cared. When I hung up, I expected to feel empty. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. That same afternoon, I drove to my bank on Peachtree Road. Mr. Jenkins, the branch manager who had watched me send money to Ryan month after month, looked shocked when I asked him to remove Ryan and Brooke from every account they had ever been linked to. He asked twice if I was certain. I told him I had never been more certain of anything in my 70 years. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store I used to visit every other week to buy paint or light bulbs for their apartment. This time I bought 3 new deadbolts and a chain lock. The clerk, Tommy, raised an eyebrow when I paid cash and said, "Doing some upgrades, Mrs. Harper." I just smiled and told him it was long overdue. The locks went in that evening. I turned the key in the last one, heard the solid click, and for the first time in decades, the house felt completely, truly mine again. 2 days later, Ryan showed up alone. He knocked like he still belonged here. When I opened the door, he looked tired, hair uncombed, wearing the same shirt I had bought him last Christmas. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, stepping forward like he was going to walk right in. I stayed in the doorway. He tried every line he had used since he was 16. How expensive Atlanta had become, how freelance work was slow this quarter, how Brooke was stressed and taking it out on everyone. He promised they would pay me back once his new contract came through. He even said he was sorry about the wedding, that it got away from them. I listened without inviting him inside. When he finished, I asked him one question. "Ryan, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing, not because you needed something?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the porch floor. That was answer enough. He left angry, saying I was making a huge mistake and that I would be sorry when I was old and alone. I closed the door, turned the new deadbolt, and started dinner for one. The following Saturday morning, I was watering the azaleas in the front yard when I heard tires crunching on the gravel. 3 cars pulled up at once, Ryan's truck, Brooke's white SUV, and a silver sedan I didn't recognize. They didn't knock. They used the spare tea I had forgotten was still hidden under the ceramic frog by the steps. By the time I walked inside, Brooke was already in my living room scrolling through her phone, Ryan was pacing, and a man in his late 50s wearing an expensive suit was spreading papers across my dining table, my personal papers, bank statements, the deed to the house, even my late husband's old will. I stopped in the doorway. "What is this?" Brooke looked up with that practiced, concerned face she used for her Instagram stories. "Evelyn, sit down. We're worried sick about you." The stranger extended a hand. "Mrs. Evelyn Harper, I'm Kenneth Hargrove, attorney at law. Your son and daughter-in-law have retained me to discuss a serious matter regarding your welfare." Ryan finally spoke, voice low. "Mom, you've been acting different, canceling accounts, changing locks, ignoring us. Mr. Hargrove thinks we should file for temporary guardianship until we figure out what's going on." Guardianship. The word landed like a fist. They wanted a judge to decide I was no longer capable of handling my own money, my own house, my own life. I walked straight to the table and started gathering my documents. "Get your hands off my things," I said, surprisingly steady, "and get out of my house." Hargrove didn't move. He slid a thick folder toward me. "Mrs. Harper, we have affidavits from neighbors, your pharmacist, even screenshots of concerning social media posts. Sudden, severe financial changes, isolation from family, installing security cameras. These are classic red flags for cognitive decline." Brooke put on fresh tears. "Evelyn, honey, we just want to protect you. You've always been so generous. This would only be temporary." Ryan stepped closer. "Mom, please, we're doing this because we love you." Love. I looked at the 3 of them standing in the home I had kept for 43 years and felt nothing but ice. I picked up the folder Hargrove had offered, walked to the kitchen trash can, and dropped it in without opening it. My mind is perfectly clear, I told them. Clearer than it's been in years. Now leave before I call the police for trespassing. Brooke's tears dried up fast. You can't throw us out. This house will be ours one day anyway. There it was, the truth, naked and ugly. Ryan's face turned red. Mom, the rent, the truck note, the credit cards. You can't just walk away from obligations you created. I created? I laughed, sharp and short. I'm done financing your life, all of you, out. Hargrove started packing his briefcase with that calm lawyer smile. This isn't over, Mrs. Harper. We can have a hearing within 30 days. A judge will decide what's best for you. They left after that, Brooke muttering threats under her breath, Ryan refusing to look at me. I watched their cars disappear down the street, then called the locksmith back. Same-day service this time, and I paid extra for the kind of locks that can't be picked or duplicated without my fingerprint. That afternoon, I drove to the office of Daniel Holman, an elder law attorney my sister Linda had used years ago in Florida. His receptionist squeezed me in as an emergency. I told him everything. The secret wedding, the $42,000, the break-in this morning, the guardianship threat. He listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back and said, Evelyn, what they're attempting is textbook financial exploitation of a senior, and entering your home to go through private papers, that's potentially criminal. We're not waiting for them to file. We are filing first a restraining order and a civil suit for undue influence and conversion of funds. For the first time since Brooke's smile in my kitchen, I felt something like hope. Before I left his office, Coleman had already drafted the paperwork and scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week. He also gave me the number for a security company that installs cameras the same day. By nightfall, 4 new cameras covered every angle of the house and yard, all feeding to an app on my phone and to the cloud. I sat on the porch with a glass of tea, watching the red recording lights blink, and realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. 10 days after the break-in, a county sheriff's deputy knocked on my door with papers in hand. Ryan and Brooke had filed for emergency temporary guardianship after all. The hearing was set for the following Monday, just 4 business days away. I called Daniel Coleman immediately. He told me not to panic. Emergency filings like theirs rarely get granted without clear medical proof of danger, and they had none. Still, we had to move fast. That same afternoon, my niece Courtney flew in from Tampa. She's my sister Linda's youngest, 28, a cardiac nurse who had heard everything from her mother and insisted on staying with me until this was over. Having her in the house felt like someone had finally turned a light back on. Coleman came over that night with a plan. First, I had a full cognitive evaluation scheduled for the next morning with Dr. Elena Vasquez, a court-recognized neuropsychologist. Second, we were countersuing for elder abuse, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the return of every dollar they had taken under false pretenses. Third, the restraining order hearing was now combined with theirs. 1 courtroom, 1 judge, 1 day. Courtney helped me gather every receipt, every bank transfer, every Venmo request Ryan and Brooke had ever sent. $42,000 printed out in a 3-inch binder. We labeled it Exhibit A. The morning of the hearing, Courtney drove me downtown to the Fulton County Courthouse. Ryan and Brooke were already in the hallway with Hargrove. Brooke wore a modest navy dress and no makeup, playing the grieving daughter-in-law. Ryan looked like he hadn't slept. Inside the courtroom, Judge Ramirez, a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, called the case. Hargrove went first. He painted me as a lonely widow who had suddenly become paranoid, changed locks, installed cameras, cut off her only child without warning. He submitted affidavits from 2 neighbors who claimed I had been acting confused, and a letter from their family doctor stating I had missed a routine appointment. Proof, he said, of decline. Coleman's turn came. He started slow, almost gentle. He put Dr. Vasquez on the stand. She testified that my cognitive scores were in the 98th percentile for my age, better than most people half my age. No impairment, no confusion, no decline. Then he called the neighbors. Under oath, one admitted Brooke had come to their door asking them to sign something about helping an elderly person in crisis. The other said Ryan had offered to mow their lawn for a year if they helped. The doctor's letter? Coleman produced my signed cancellation for that appointment. I had rescheduled because I was out of town visiting Linda. Hargrove started to sweat. When Brooke took the stand, Coleman asked her a single question. Mrs. Harper, can you name one time in the last 2 years you visited your mother-in-law without asking for money within the first hour? She couldn't. Ryan refused to testify after that. Hargrove asked for a recess. Judge Ramirez denied it. At the end of the day, she ruled from the bench. Emergency guardianship denied. Temporary restraining order granted against Ryan and Brooke. No contact, no coming within 500 feet of my home. Their petition for permanent guardianship was dismissed with prejudice. And she scheduled a hearing in 60 days for our civil suit, warning Hargrove that if we proved financial exploitation, the court would consider criminal referral. We walked out into the Georgia sunshine. Courtney squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. For the first time since that cold smile across my kitchen table, I cried, not from pain, but from relief. That evening back home, Maggie from next door brought over a peach cobbler and stayed for coffee. Courtney raised her glass of sweet tea and said, "To Aunt Evelyn, who just beat them at their own game." I laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. 3 weeks after the courthouse victory, I was sitting on the porch swing with Maggie when a white county van pulled up. A woman in her 40s wearing a lanyard and carrying a clipboard got out and walked straight to my steps. "Mrs. Evelyn Harper?" I nodded. "I'm Sandra Morales from Adult Protective Services. We received an anonymous report that you may be at risk of self-neglect and possible undue influence. I need to do a welfare check." Courtney, who had decided to stay another month, came to the door behind me. Sandra explained that someone had filed a detailed complaint. Sudden isolation, excessive spending on security, confusion about finances, even claims I was giving large sums to new friends who had moved in. I knew exactly who had written every word. I invited her in. Refusing would only make things worse. She walked through the house, looked in the fridge, asked about medications, only blood pressure pills and a multivitamin, checked that the smoke detectors worked, and watched me balance my own checkbook on the kitchen table without a single mistake. Courtney sat quietly the whole time, arms crossed. Sandra asked to speak to me alone. Once Courtney stepped outside, the questions got sharper. "Mrs. Harper, are you afraid of your son or daughter-in-law?" "No," I said. "I'm afraid of what they're willing to do for money." "Has anyone pressured you to change your will or give away assets?" "Only the people who filed this report." I handed her the thick folder Coleman had prepared weeks earlier. The bank records, the restraining order, the judge's ruling, the $42,000 in transfers. Sandra read in silence for 20 minutes. When she closed the folder, she looked almost embarrassed. "Ma'am, this is one of the clearest cases of retaliatory reporting I've seen. I'm closing this investigation today, and I'm noting the false report for potential charges." She left with an apology and a promise that no one would bother me from her office again. That same evening, Brooke created a private Instagram story. Courtney still had access through a mutual friend. It was a tear-streaked selfie with the caption, When family turns their back on you for no reason, pray for us. Within hours, the post was gone, but not before half the neighborhood saw it. The backlash started the next day. Old friends of Ryan's parents called me to ask if I was okay. A woman from my church Bible study dropped off a casserole and whispered that Brooke had been asking people to keep Evelyn in your prayers. She's really struggling. The story was spreading. Poor young couple being shut out by a bitter old woman. I refused to play defense on social media. Coleman said, let them talk. Every lie made our civil suit stronger. A week later, the certified letter arrived. Hargrove had filed a new motion, this time claiming I owed them filial support for bills I had co-signed years ago. The truck, a credit card, even part of Brooke's student loans they had refinanced in my name without telling me. Coleman laughed when he read it. Desperation, he said. They're bleeding money, and they know the restraining order blocks them from asking neighbors for help directly. This is their last card. We countered with discovery demands. Every bank statement, every tax return, every Venmo transaction for the last 5 years. Within days, their lawyer asked for a settlement conference. I told Coleman no settlement. I wanted my day in court again, and this time I wanted the truth on the record for good. Courtney helped me update my will that weekend. Everything, the house, the remaining savings, my wedding ring, would go to her and to a local senior protection nonprofit. Ryan and Brooke were explicitly disinherited, with a letter attached explaining exactly why, in case they ever challenged it later. When we finished, Courtney hugged me and said, Aunt Ev, you're the strongest person I know. I didn't feel strong. I felt tired, but the kind of tired that comes after carrying something heavy for far too long and finally setting it down. 6 weeks after the civil trial win, Hargrove filed an appeal on some technicality about jury instructions. Coleman said it was a long shot, but we had to respond anyway. The hearing was set for a crisp November morning in the appellate court downtown. Ryan and Brooke showed up with a new lawyer this time. Hargrove had bailed after the judgment stuck them with his fees, too. The new one was younger, sharper, named Miss Patel. She argued that the lower court had ignored cultural expectations of familial support and that the $42,000 were gifts, not loans, so no repayment was due. Coleman dismantled it point by point. He replayed the texts on a projector for the 3-judge panel, highlighted the false affidavits from the guardianship attempt, and entered new evidence we had uncovered during discovery. Brooks deleted emails to a real estate agent asking how to force a partition sale on my house after the old lady passes. The judges asked few questions. One, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, looked directly at Ryan during Patel's closing and said, "Son, did you ever think to get a second job instead of suing your mother?" Ryan shifted in his seat but didn't answer. The panel ruled from the bench. Appeal denied, judgment affirmed, and an additional $10,000 in sanctions against Ryan and Brooke for a frivolous filing meant to harass. Brooke stormed out of the courtroom sobbing. Ryan followed, yelling something about bias. Coleman shook my hand in the hallway and said, "That's the end of the legal road for them. Now we collect." Collecting wasn't easy. Their assets were slim. The truck was repossessed 2 weeks later when they missed payments. Brooke's SUV went next. We garnished Ryan's freelance checks. What little came in went straight to us before he saw a dime. Courtney ran a background check through a nurse friend and found they had applied for Chapter 13 bankruptcy protection. The judge overseeing it laughed when he saw our judgment listed as a priority debt. "You don't get to discharge money you took from your own mother," he ruled. Their repayment plan stretched 5 years, with us getting first cut every month. The neighborhood gossip mill turned against them fast. Maggie heard from her bridge group that Brooke's influencer gigs dried up when sponsors saw the court records online. No brand wants drama like that. Ryan lost his last client when the owner, an old family friend, called me personally to apologize for ever hiring him. They moved out of Atlanta 3 months in. Courtney's Tampa connections told us they landed in a cheap suburb near Orlando, crashing with Brooke's aunt in a 2-bedroom condo. Ryan took a night shift job at a warehouse. Brooke waited tables at a chain restaurant. No more Cancun trips, no more sponsored posts. I didn't gloat. I grieved the son I thought I had raised, the one who built forts in the backyard and promised to take care of me one day. But that boy was long gone, replaced by a man who saw dollar signs where a mother should be. With the money coming back in slow drips, I remodeled the guest room for Courtney's visits. We planted a vegetable garden in the spring, tomatoes and peppers that tasted like victory. Maggie and I joined a senior walking group at the community center, laughing about men and money every Tuesday. One afternoon in May, a year to the day after Brooke's cold smile, I got a handwritten letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the writing. "Mom," it started, "we've learned our lesson. Brooke and I are in therapy. We miss you. Can we start over?" I read it twice, felt the old pull in my chest, then folded it and put it in the binder with the rest of the evidence. Coleman had warned me about this, the reconciliation ploy when the money runs dry. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Linda and booked a flight to Florida for a sister's weekend. No emergencies, no obligations, just sun and stories. Courtney moved back permanently that summer, taking a job at Emory Hospital. She brought life back into the house, music in the evenings, friends over for barbecues, plans for holidays that didn't revolve around anyone else's needs. One night over dinner she asked, "Aunt Ev, do you ever regret cutting them off?" I thought about the $42,000 slowly trickling back, the peace in my mornings, the friends who stayed without asking for a thing. "No," I said, "regret would mean wishing for the old pain back. This is better." She nodded, and we cleared the plates in comfortable silence. 2 years have passed since the appellate judges shut the door for good. The house on Maplewood Drive is quieter now, but it's the kind of quiet that feels earned. Courtney never left. She bought the empty lot next door, built a small cottage, and we share the garden in between. Some evenings we sit on my porch with Maggie and whoever else wanders over, drinking sweet tea and watching fireflies like we're 20 again. The $42,000 came back in full, plus interest. I used half to finish paying off Courtney's student loans, something I never got to do for Ryan, and put the rest into a trust that will fund nursing scholarships for kids from single-parent homes. The first recipient starts at Georgia State next fall. Ryan and Brooke's life unraveled the way these things do when the safety net disappears overnight. The Chapter 13 plan fell apart after 6 missed payments. The bankruptcy converted to Chapter 7, everything liquidated. They lost the furniture I had bought, the truck, even Brooke's engagement ring went to a pawn shop in Orlando. Last I heard through a mutual acquaintance who still feels sorry for them, they're renting a 1-bedroom in a rough part of Kissimmee. Ryan works double shifts driving for a delivery app. Brooke waits tables and posts old photos on a new private account, pretending nothing happened. They divorced last spring. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knows it was money. Brooke moved in with a guy who owns a used car lot. Ryan sleeps on a cousin's couch when he's not working. I never got another letter. Some Sundays I drive out to the cemetery where my husband Tom is buried under a dogwood tree. I bring fresh flowers and tell him the parts he missed. I tell him our granddaughter turned out better than we ever dreamed, that the house is full of laughter again, that I finally learned the difference between helping and enabling. I always end the same way. I kept the promise, Tom. I kept myself safe. People still ask if I miss my son. The honest answer is I miss the idea of him, the little boy with scraped knees who swore he'd buy me a mansion one day. The man he became was never really mine to miss. Courtney and I took that Europe trip I always postponed. We spent 3 weeks in Italy eating pasta and drinking wine that cost less than the copays I used to send Ryan. In Assisi, I lit a candle for the mother I was and another for the woman I finally allowed myself to become. When we got home, there was a postcard in the mailbox. No return address, just a blurry photo of an Atlanta highway sign. On the back, in Ryan's handwriting, "Saw this and thought of you." I looked at it for a long time, then slipped it into the same binder with the texts and the judgments and the divorce decree. Some chapters you don't reopen. These days, my phone rings with dinner invitations, not emergencies. My calendar has painting classes on Tuesdays, book club on Thursdays, and long weekends whenever Courtney and I feel like it. The guest room is always ready for Linda when she flies up from Florida, and the porch swing is big enough for new friends who never once ask what I can do for them. I'm 72 now, healthier than I was at 65, and for the first time in my life, no one is keeping score of what I give. Love that has to be paid for was never love. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It's the last promise you make to the younger version of yourself who sacrificed too much for too long. And sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is close the door, turn the lock she should have turned years earlier, and walk into the rest of her life without looking back. My name is Evelyn Harper. This is the story of how I stopped buying love and finally started living.